Hey everybody, Roy Rogers here from the Second Sons and the White Book, back with another one of these the how and why of it videos. This time this is a little bit more like hot off the presses than the last few videos that I've done, where I had a lot of experience either playing with or playing against the archetypes and decks that I talked about. Instead, we're going to talk about kind of the new hotness. I mean, Wama's big victory since the last video I published about Tyrell. Wama's big victory, congratulations Wama, with Tyrell Wars really just sort of cranked Tyrell into the stratosphere. It's really popular both in major tournaments and on Iron Throne. But there's another kind of deck that's sort of been a little bit overshadowed by Wama's smashing through 200 plus people in Europe, and that is Martell Wars to come. This deck has had a lot of success at KublaCon, where I think there were 3 versions of it in the top 16, maybe just 2. I know Andras and CT were playing it. I think there was one other person that broke through with it. CT won a regional in the Midwest with it. It did well. A version of it, I think, did well at Euros. So, and you just see it everywhere online. So, but the deck's relatively new. Before KublaCon, I hadn't really seen people playing it. I had heard some rumblings that this deck was kind of out there, but it was still kind of new. And, you know, while it feels like a lifetime since KublaCon and Euros, it really hasn't been. So the deck is not published. There's not a published list from one of the people who have done successful with it. So it's still a little bit out there as kind of an unsolved archetype that's just starting to get off the ground and just starting to get refined. And I'm sure, since we're now currently, when this video is recorded, in the heart of the regional season, and with Gen Con coming up in North America, we're going to probably be seeing a lot more of this deck. So I thought I don't have a huge amount of experience. I played against it some on the Iron Throne. I played a little bit with it on the Iron Throne myself. I've talked to sort of people about the deck and how it works. So I think I understand it somewhat well, but it's definitely not refined yet. And the problem I also had is that there's no tournament winning version of the deck published right now. So I don't have a version to share with you that's won a tournament. So what I did find, though, is Adam Huang, excuse me, former Chinese national champion, big success at Worlds last year. He has a version of it on the Iron Throne that I think is pretty close. It's not obviously, and I'll talk a little bit when we get there, obviously as refined as I think is the versions you'll necessarily see at regionals, but the basic game plan, plots, and synergies are in his version of the deck. And Adam's a great player and an interesting deck builder, and I've highlighted his Targ deck before, so I thought I would highlight this deck as well. So I will give you guys Adam's deck list. All right, and so how this video is going to work is sort of the way all of these how and the why of it videos have worked before. I'm going to go I'm going to go over, there we go. I'm going to go over Adam's deck list. I'm going to talk about the synergies, its game plan, how it wins, why it's so powerful, how recently it's been sort of become this theme in Tyrell has become, excuse me, not Tyrell, Martell. Once again, the bane of my existence is George Martin's love of the L sound in his faction names / house names. Anyway, so going over sort of how these synergies in Martell play out and why the deck can win. And then I'll go over some general strategies or cards that counter it. As we'll kind of get to it, I'll talk about it more specifically because the deck is not fully refined yet and not fully out there in published form. You know, the counter strategies to it are nowhere near perfected. But I'm going to give you sort of 5 cards, I think, 4 or 5 cards, that I think are pretty solid answers to the deck and its synergies and can really disrupt it. Because a lot of the traditional answers to Martell, such as Jakob's Plot, King of the North, do not work against this deck very well. So, spoiler alert. And then I will give you a deck that I think relatively consistently beats it. It definitely beat it at KublaCon, so if you can probably figure out the deck that I'm going to be talking about at the end from that spoiler. So I think the other reason to go over Martell Wars is a lot of commentators in the community, myself included, but my fellow White Book hosts, the Wars to Come guys, everybody who sort of has just random commentators on Facebook, sort of have, since the Martell box, been sort of threatening, you know, talking about this big threat of Martell becoming one of the factions that does really unfair things in the same way in which Tyrell does really unfair things and Targaryen does really unfair things, and sort of raises it above the curve of the other decks in the field and other factions in the field. And actually, up to recently, that's kind of been not the case. But I think the last chapter pack, Someone Always Tells, really finally like clicked all the synergies of Martell together and produced this archetype of these Martell Wars to Come decks that we're going to talk about. So I think that this is kind of the nightmare that was keeping up a lot of people with the release of the Martell box, who for a couple months could breathe that sigh of relief. Okay, Martell's not as broken as we thought of. If we could just get rid of combo, maybe, Tyrell will be brought in line, kind of. And we got these Targ decks to worry about, but Martell is just kind of this relatively fair attrition and control faction. Well, not so much now. All right, so we're going to get into that. So let's take a look at Adam's deck. Oop, not turning off my video. That would be a mistake, which it was. Turning on the... Oh, nope. There we go. Okay, here we go. Here's Adam's deck. All right, so we've got Adam's deck, which he just named Test, and says, don't try this deck, says it's trash, super weak, just for entertainment. Nice try, Adam. All right, so Martell Wars to Come. Why is this deck good? Okay, so why would this archetype be relatively good? Okay, so the reason why it's relatively good has everything to do with, first, the agenda, all right, which is the Wars to Come, right? This lets you play an additional 3 plot cards and include a second copy of up to 2 different cards in your plot deck. All right, so what this does is it gives Martell access to additional tools for a theme it's had since the core set. That is, your cards get more powerful as you have more plots in your use pile. So bottom line, now that you're running 10 plots rather than 7, you have more access to those synergies. And this is something that has been sitting as kind of a sleeper agent, a Manchurian card game candidate, whatever terrible metaphor you want to use to describe it, but it's been sitting there waiting to get more and more development from the core set, right? And the fact that one core set card is the core of this deck, and that is Doran's Game. All right, so Doran's Game is a core set card, and if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to read the card because it's really important to understand how the card works. So it's an event. It costs 1 and it's loyal. It has reaction. After you win an intrigue challenge by 5 or more strength, gain X power for your faction. X is the number of plot cards in your use pile, max 1 per challenge. So you can't chain them. All right, so no extra cards, no other bullshit. Pardon my French. Martell, now that you have the Wars to Come with its 10 plot cards, you have way more access to getting big Doran's games off, right? So you can have 6, 7, 8 power off a single Doran's game, okay? Before you flip, right? That's crazy. That's super crazy. Not possible before. All right. Now, there's also this sleeper third cycle card that's going to power this up. So, baseline, before we get to the card that's really broken in Wars to Come, just the agenda itself makes cards like Doran's Game much, much more powerful. The card that really accelerates this, though, that the synergy is really hard between Wars to Come and Doran's Game and other effects, we'll get to those other effects in a second, is Ricasso. Ricasso is super duper crucial to this deck, and we'll get to, as answering this deck, you need to deal with Ricasso, because Ricasso is cost 3, 3 strength, intrigue, power, unique character, ally steward, bestow 2. You are considered to have additional X plot cards in your use pile. X is the number of gold Ricasso has. So you're always going to this deck is always going to bestow Ricasso. So that means, like, on turn 3, you can get 4 power off a Doran's Game. You can just do crazy things with Ricasso, with the Wars to Come, which gives you more natural plots, and then Doran's Game, which gives you crazy power claim. Ricasso was pretty good, I guess you could say, but he was kind of just not a real entity. Like most Martell decks up to the Martell box, up to Someone Always Tells, were more attrition decks. And Ricasso doesn't really fit in a attrition strategy. He fits in this kind of mid-range to kind of combo, but it's not like a combo deck in the way in which we traditionally think about it, because of sort of the Tyrell decks, and to a lesser extent Hyper Viper and Wonder Woman, that have dominated the game for the first time. It's not necessarily an OTK deck, because it can't get a huge Doran's game off on turn 1. It can do some crazy things, but it can't do that turn 1 or even necessarily turn 2. But as the game goes along, the power of Doran's game grows and grows and grows, particularly when it's accelerated by Ricasso. All right, so it's not that, and it does play to the board more than a lot of other Martell decks. Play to the board is actually like keeping a steady presence compared to, say, like a Martell Wolf deck, or some of the other like Martell Fealties and things like that were kind of floating around before this, or Martell Rose, which kind of like punished people through big claim pots and sort of just like grinded you out. This is not a grinding you out deck. This is a deck that is a much more like good or more honest combo deck, in the sense that it can win in one turn, but that's going to be turn 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., etc. It's going to play characters. There is room for interaction. Unlike once it has its like Doran's game Ricasso, there are things you can do, and we'll get to them. That's much clearer than against the Tyrell OTK decks, Hyper Viper, Wonder Woman. There's much more counterplay available to people who are playing against these decks, but these decks are extremely powerful because of what Ricasso does with Wars to Come. So some of the things that Ricasso and Wars to Come power up is Secret Schemes, which is kneel your faction card, draw X cards. X is the number of plots in your use pile, which means you can get, like, on turn 3, a 4-card Secret Schemes if you have Ricasso. You have Prince Doran's Behest. Oh god, this card. Super busted in Wars to Come in general, but particularly busted because your turn 2 is now a turn 3, right? It accelerates. If you open Prince Doran's Behest, you are setting yourself one plot ahead, which also just powers Ricasso, which powers Doran's game and powers Secret Schemes, and plus you get the flexibility of being able to decide what you want to open with, right? You can open with a Marched, you can open with a Nothing Burns of the Cold, or go into Long Plan, or things like that, or a Counting if you feel like your opponent's going to have a weak start. Like, they open Counting, you can flip into your own Counting. There's lots of cool interactions, right, that you can just decide, right? Or you can do a turn 2. You have a clear opener here, like, say, you want a Nothing Burns away their poor set up a location, like they set up like a wall or a Doran or something like that you can easily snipe. Boom. Next turn, you can do Prince Doran's Behest and see what you need to do. It also, and we'll get to its interaction with Someone Always Tells, pretty soon. So, very, very powerful. What are some other cards that are powered up by it? Prince's Plan. Prince's Plan was largely panned by reviewers when it came out, but I've really come around to this deck. This card. I actually came around to it thanks to the South Jersey guys who were playing at Gen Con a Martell Crossing deck that used Prince's Plan really well to sort of just control the challenges phase, get a lot of challenges off with a smaller number of characters with a weird icon spread, because of course it adds an icon, so like the Chuddy Knights. House Day Knights can become Tricons, things like that. Just it's a really cool card, very powerful, pretty easy to get back. Matt playing this knocked me out of contention to make the top 16 at Gen Con playing this deck. It was a very close game, really cool game. I wish it had been streamed. It was a very interactive, cool game, very close. If I had just seen a wall a little bit earlier. Anyway, I've been a big fan of this card since then, and it's really powerful in this deck because, turn 2 with Prince Doran's Behest and Ricasso, you can get a massive strength pump that's really, really surprising, all right? So, super powerful, right? And then Quentin Martell, right, he has a weak, he's seemingly weak early in the game, but, like, turn 2 with Ricasso, he could just be a 3-cost, 5-strength body with Renown with no drawback. Like, he's ridiculous, right? Just so powerful. This deck is running just generally utility cards, like Green Blood Trader, Dorn. Where are you, Dorn? Dorn. It's got a cheeky one of Red Viper, who, of course, synergizes pretty well with Prince's Plan. It's not running like, oh, it is running Doran. It's got Doran, who gives additional power for each plot card in your used pile. You don't always see Doran in these decks. Sometimes he's in, sometimes he's out. Very, very powerful. But this deck would theoretically be very vulnerable to plot-based disruption. Ricasso is a cheap character. You know, he's vulnerable to First Snow. He's vulnerable to oh my god, the Lannister guy, the 6-cost Cerulean Pain. There we go. I had it in my brain. Cerulean Pain to chip away at his dupes and then go into a Valor, get rid of him, boom. Because the deck is just not particularly good without Ricasso. Because Ricasso gives them time. So, if, you know, every turn that Ricasso sticks is just constantly threatening craziness. And it gives that craziness early, right? And it kind of gets away from that drawback that people who say, oh, Wars to Come is not that strong, of not being able to recycle into plots you might need, like a Valor or a Marched or a Calling or a Breaking Ties that you need sort of you need to get back to it to answer what your opponent's doing. Well, with Wars to Come, you can't get there, but Ricasso, you know, cuts back on that drawback because you're just constantly pumping up your used plot effects. So if you could deal with Ricasso, you take a lot of the wind, almost all of the wind out of the sails. Then they're just playing kind of like a mediocre Martell deck, right? But it's hard to deal with Ricasso if they see a dupe. It's hard to deal with Ricasso if they see two dupes without plots. But so your Valors, your Marches, all these kind of your First Snows, all these kind of answers, well, they are answered by Someone Always Tells, the brand new event that when the effects of opponent's event or triggered plot ability would initiate, cancel those effects. So you could cancel Valor Margulis, you could cancel March to the Wall, you could cancel people's countings and things like that. And there's lots of tools in the deck to give you access to the Prince's Plan, or excuse me, to Someone Always Tells. This deck is running 4 actually, excuse me. It's running Calling the Banners, which you get 1 gold for each character opponent controls. And it's got high initiative, so you can go first, counterintuitive to Martell, but go first, trigger your plot, get the gold, trigger your opponent's plot, cancel it. Same is true with Trade Routes, which you're running 2 of in this deck. And then, of course, the long plan can just let you bank gold, and then you get the additional bonus of being able to flip any plot you want and still have this gold. Like, it's very strong, long plan. It's back in the meta, so very powerful. So these 4 plots are really strong with it. It's not, now this version of the deck is not running some of the cards like In Doran's Name, which is the one that kneels the faction card and you gain gold equal to the number of plots. You can run that, obviously. You can do other, you know, that's a big tool. You could be running like a second Calling the Banners. It could be running Littlefinger's Meddling. This deck isn't running those, but those are all options that you could also throw into a Martell War. So, like, the plot deck I also don't think is 100% fixed. Like, this is a pretty solid one. It has some good answer cards to what the meta's got going on. It's got some tools in the mirror match that Adam's got in here. But, you know, it's obviously, I don't think the archetype is refined yet, so we don't know 100%, like, what are the 10 best plots. I think probably 6 of them are in here. Probably in Prince Doran's Behest, Breaking Ties, the Trade Routes, and the Long Plan are probably all set. But you could probably trade out, like, if you're building this, or don't expect to see probably some version of those in all Martell Wars decks. But the other cards that they're running, like there's like a Knights variant that's out there. There's ones that are a bit more like attrition-y, so a little closer to this plot deck, but it could be running things like Double March. There's like a lot of flexibility because you have 10 plots and not so much required plots, except for ones that give you gold, right? So that you can, Someone Always Tells someone. So, like, you could see things like someone running Littlefinger's Meddling to make their Doran's Game good, or their Someone Always Tells cheap, or their Secret Schemes. Like, it's really just strong. Really strong. Or get their Prince's Plans for free. Like, these are all things that you could definitely see, right? And so, and it also is just, it's the other major synergy is, of course, Dawn, which is surprisingly a good card now because of Ricasso and Wars to Come, accelerating your ability to pump up the number of used plots. All right, so you're also running a variety of just good Martell cards, right? The broken Martell economy card, Endurance Fiefdoms, Flea Bottom, which has all the interactions with just that, Shadow City Bastard, the new Nymeria, Larissa Sands, Greenblood Trader. Now, interestingly, Adam here is running the new Arion. Most of the ones I played against is running the Corset Arion, just for the additional sneaking. And then, of course, Arya-Hota. There's of course, the new Arya-Hota, who synergizes with used plots, is really strong, and I've seen versions that are running him, but I've also seen versions that are running this card, because they're both really good in this deck. So the question is, like, are you going more all in with your Flea Bottom synergy? Like, since this version, and I think running Flea Bottom is probably the right call. I'm sure the CTs in the world could argue against me, but I think running Flea Bottom is the right call, particularly because Shadow City Bastard is just so good. Like, particularly to guarantee your intrigue challenge against factions that like don't have a lot of intrigue icons. The ability to take Tyrion, take Dany, take Cats, take all of these, Cat in particular's icon consistently every turn after turn after turn to protect your Doran's game and get it off is really good, right? So I'm not 100% on this Arion, but I think that this Arya-Hota in this build, but there are builds that don't rely as much on Flea Bottom, and so thus you don't need the ability to sort of sneak Arya into play, so you can just run the 4-cost one from the box. So, this deck it's running, of course, House-Dane Escort, which is another sort of just a board presence card that sort of just keeps powering and is good with both just your Ricasso synergies, but also with your Flea Bottom. So very powerful. It's, you got Venomous Blade. Like, it's just this version. It's just, you have a bunch of good Martell cards. So again, if your Ricasso gets shut down, it's not the end of the world. You still have good Martell cards, but the deck just loses so much of its reason to play is focused on just the way in which Ricasso powers up these synergies. All right, so what makes this deck so dangerous is this Doran's game. Because this Doran's game, you only need to get 1 or 2 off, right? And if you do, like if you could get to like 4 power and get a huge Doran's game, you can just win on a single challenge, right? And the thing is also, like, a lot of factions have weak intrigue, right? Have a lot of weak, just like Stark, Baratheon, Night's Watch. If you can catch a Greyjoy player off guard, right? If you can just deal with Greyjoy's, like, whichever of their Tricons they have, either Asha or Euron, you can get your Doran's game off. Like, it's very strong. And the fact that you can force them also to defend the intrigue challenge rather than attacking you every turn is, again, very strong, right? Oh, and Targaryen has pretty weak intrigue icons, actually, as well. And a lot of their good intrigue icons are vulnerable to Shadow City Bastard, right? The new Dany is 5 strength, right? Or 5, excuse me, not 5 strength, 5 cost, and gets hit by Shadow City Bastard. So you can punish factions that just are weaker on the intrigue, right? Stark, Baratheon, Night's Watch, and Targaryen that are pretty weak on the intrigue, right? Or force them off their game, right? And you have Doran, you have Dawn, you have Prince's Plan to push over the factions like Lannister, Tyrell, and a Greyjoy player that draws well that has a lot of good, beefy intrigue icons. So you punish the people who are weaker on their intrigue, and then you have the tools necessary to go over the stronger factions. Now, the deck, and of course it's running Doran, so that gives you card advantage. If you don't see your pieces early, you can just get a huge hand and keep a huge hand because you have a ton of intrigue icons. So very, very powerful. All right, so why this deck is so good has everything to do with Doran's game. So to beat it, you need some tools that are going to deal with Doran's game. And deal with some of their synergies from Flea Bottom. So the first one is that. Oh, and also one more thing before I get the cards to answer it. Now, normally in this segment, because this is a Martell deck, I would be arguing that you should include Jakob's Plot King in the North, because that just generally blows out Martell Wolf. It blows out Martell Fealty, Martell Rose, because they don't. Well, yeah, Martell Rose could theoretically run the King attachment, but that's a little iffy. Martell Wolf, I don't think the Stark attachment is loyal or non-loyal, but it could be. Still, it only goes on Stark characters. You're not going to run that, right? And no one's running Mance, right? Because 7 cost, no. So Martell does not have access to a king, and that has been the thing that's pushed Martell down a lot since Jakob's Plot came out. The thing is, though, Ricasso is not a triggered effect. Ricasso is not a triggered effect, and Doran's game is not an attachment, a location, or a character. Same with Princess Plan. Same with Doran. This relies mostly, actually, on trigger, and Dawn, if you got Dawn out, right? On non-triggered effects on its characters, locations, and attachments. Now, it definitely hurts their economy base, right? Because it relies almost entirely, like, Adam's version ties exactly. There's no Rose Roads in here. Oh, yes, there are. Well, I'm stupid. But there are Rose Roads. But its entire economy base, besides the Rose Roads, is triggered. So that hurts. And turning off the Dora's Fiefdoms is sweet, right? But the punch of the deck, is through non-triggered effects. And that's a huge benefit, because so many decks across so many factions are running King in the North, particularly the best ones in the form of Tyrell. And even Targaryen now. You see it definitely in Targaryen. As well, you can see it in just like a lot of different factions. Lannister, you can just see it. And it's really frustrating for a lot of Martell players, but not for this deck. And that silver bullet answer that has just sort of kept Martell down in the meta is no longer an influence. And so you need to come up with different answers. So I have 5 suggestions. One is a very traditional Martell suggestion, and we'll just start there, which is barring the gates. So barring the gates. This is, of course, the plot that says card abilities cannot cause characters to enter play. All right, so this shuts off their Flea Bottom synergies. It shuts off any ambush that they have now. Adam's version isn't running a huge amount of ambush, but it is running Flea Bottom, and that is very good for you. And there are different variants of the deck. Some are more influenced on Flea Bottom, some are more influenced on ambush. Just the ability to say, and particularly if they're relying on the new Ariel Hota, just be able to say, no, you cannot do that. We're not dealing with this. This is a turn where the board is all that matters. What's on the board when we go into challenges phase is going to be on the board, is all we've got to deal with, right? And that lets you control the combat map for that turn and get off your various effects that can answer Doran's game. All right, so barring the gates is the first thing. And of course, barring the gates right now is a fantastic card in general. It's really strong against Tyrell. It's really strong against some of the more attrition decks like Night's Watch Wolf. It's really strong against Lannister. It just has a lot of potential to answer what's in the meta right now, plus has a bonus of being good against Martell Wars decks. Then so you've got a plot, barring the gates. I'll get the one more thing before we move on for barring the gates. So there's other plots that usually can answer these kind of decks, like your King Commands It, which turns off Power Claim except for Kings or Queens. Great against a Martell deck. Except Martell doesn't put a lot of characters, or these Doran's Game deck, they don't put the power on their characters, right? Doran's Game puts it on your house card. Not good, right? And we went over King in the North, Jakob's Plot. That also doesn't answer it. So a lot of traditional answers to Martell just don't work against Doran's game. But Barring the Gate still does, because turning off Flea Bottom is just simply good for you. Flea Bottom's a problem. All right. But now I need to talk about what's going to answer Ricasso. So the next 4 cards I'm going to suggest are cards about stopping Ricasso. And again, once you deal with Ricasso or Doran, you give yourself the ability to deal with their BS, right? And the first one is Nightmares. Nightmares on Ricasso, Nightmares on Doran, Nightmares on the Viper if they have that, but particularly Ricasso. This is for Ricasso. So that means they have to have Someone Always Tells, and they have to have saved the 2 gold into the challenges phase. And they can't use that 2 gold to play. So even if they cancel this, they can't use that 2 gold to play. Oh my God, what's it called? The Prince's Plan. There we go. The Prince's Plan, or their if they're using Hand's Judgment, then they can't play their Doran's Game. It just eats away. If they cancel this, it eats away at their gold, and that's useful. But also, just if they don't have an answer to it, blank Ricasso, they can't do their crazy BS, right? And the same is true for Hand's Judgment. Hand's Judgment is even more necessary. Like, Nightmares is good for dealing with Ricasso. Hand's Judgment is even more necessary because it deals with the Doran's Game, right? It forces them to have one of their 3. Now, some of these Doran's Games decks could be going into having 3, Someone Always Tells, 3 Hand's Judgments. That's a huge number of slots that even if I cancel, it makes them vulnerable to some other things. But Hand's Judgment, to get that Doran's Game, is super important, right? Super duper duper important. Because if they get that Doran's Game off, you're going to lose. So if you can't stop them in the challenges, you need that. Bran is even better than this if you're running Stark, and we'll get to another good answer in Stark in a second. Bran is even better because a lot of the decks aren't running Nightmares. They don't have Treachery. They don't have a way of canceling Bran, so Bran says, boop, no Doran's Game. Sorry. That's why Venomous Blade is really important to the Martell deck, because it kills him. Same with Winterfell as well. But Hand's Judgment is just accessible to all factions, and right now, you should be running at least 2 or 3. I'm sorry to say, I don't like this card, but just like Index, I hate top decking it. But just the power of Targaryen and its event-based strategy, and the power of Doran's Game just says Hand's Judgment, Hand's Judgment, Hand's Judgment. Force them to have their own Hand's Judgment, or force them to have Someone Always Tells. And, if they have Someone Always Tells, you know what? You tried. And it's better to have tried and failed than to not have tried at all, because you've got to, for those factions, and even factions with high intrigue possibilities, need to be able to answer the Hand's Judgment, right? Because particularly if you backfoot them a little bit, where they can't save a ton of gold, they have to keep playing to the board. For them to Hand's Judgment, they need to have access, or to Someone Always Tells, they have to have 1 gold for Doran's Game. They have to have 1 gold for the Hand's Judgment, or 2 gold if there's Someone Always Tells. That's 3 gold that they have to save, which can add up over time. And it means that they can't play as much of the board. Of course, Water Gardens helps with one of those 2 things. But, they can't also play the Prince's Plan to make the character really huge, and then go over to get their Hand's Judgment, or to get their Doran's Game off. So just you having Hand's Judgment gives you outs that a lot of decks don't have, and it forces your opponent to play more conservatively. If they know you have Hand's Judgment, if they're a good player, they're going to be playing around Hand's Judgment, so that slows the deck down, right? It gives you more time to execute your game plan. So again, this card, even more than Nightmares, I like Nightmares a lot because it's a flexible answer to the character-based synergies. Again, Ricasso, Doran, Red Viper, right? I mean, Arion, sure, if they're running that version of Arion, but it really, Quentin to turn off his Renown, to turn off the Water Gardens. If you're the first player, they make you first. You can boom the Water Gardens to prevent them from playing their Doran's Game for cheap, like things like that. So really, really useful Nightmares is. But Hand's Judgment, I think, is even more important because, you should really be running both. You should be following Alejandro's advice at like 2 to 3 Nightmares, 2 to 3 Hand's Judgments in a lot of decks, particularly those without the intrigue power, you need to have answers to Doran's game. Now, other answers, though, that focus very much on Ricasso, it would be Ward. Ward is super fun against Ricasso. Stealing him and then doing bad things to him is like, feels good. Feels good, man. It's a great feeling to just take him. Most of these, now they might be running, that's why you're running the Breaking Ties to pop. Well, actually, because Ricasso's loyal, Breaking Ties isn't an answer. Yay! See? Right? So but you can pop your opponent's Ricasso with your Breaking Ties. See, you always find in the synergies live on tape. But anyway, stealing him, doing bad things to him, or just keeping him so he can't be replayed is really useful. I mean, it doesn't do, well, it actually turns off some synergies in Stark. Great John and I think it's just Great John that sees play. But but the Vanguard, the Great John Vanguard, or Great John himself. But whatever. Like, you'd much rather just take Ricasso than care about turning it off if you're running Mono Stark. But like Night's Watch Wolf, really useful to just steal him and do bad things to him, particularly if he's like duped. It's like the most amazing feeling. And that just gives you time to execute your game plan. Because without Ricasso, again, they're running a mostly mediocre Martell deck that, like, people before Ricasso and before Wars to Come, people weren't playing Doran's game, really. I mean, there were some Doran's game decks floating around, but they were not consistent. And so you're taking a huge amount of consistency away from the deck by warding away Ricasso. So Ricasso is super useful. Or, excuse me, Ward is super useful against Ricasso. And then the third that gives effect, and I think it's, before we move on, actually, Ward is good in Stark, because I think Stark is super vulnerable to Doran's game strategies. They don't have the intrigue power. You have to see a lot of different things to counter it. You've got to see your Bran, you've got to see a Winterfell, and you've got to see Cat. And like a lot of Stark decks aren't necessarily running Winterfell right now. The best Stark deck right now is running Big Cat rather than Small Cat, which is problematic. Cat is vulnerable to Shadow City Bastard, or to versions of this deck that are running just the other icon removal cards, like Doran Spy. Yeah, Stark's really vulnerable. You don't, like, besides Catelyn, like, Big Cat is useful for defending those intrigue challenges, but like if they're running if their version is, unlike Adam's, is running Doran Spy, well, she loses her intrigue icon. Or you can go over her with the Prince's Plan. Like, there's just like a lot of answers to the tools that Stark has if they don't see Bran. So Ward gives you an additional answer and has the ability to sort of just take Ricasso away from them for the most of the rest of the game. Really strong. Another faction I think that is pretty weak to Doran's game as well is Greyjoy, which brings us to Triss. Triss is very flexible here. That 3 strength protects him from Venomous Blade. If you can get a duped Triss early, you really can put some pressure on them. You can remove Doran's game from the game. Whew, that is hard to say. You can remove Ricasso from the game. You can remove Dorn. There's like and the pillage helps. There's like a lot of power in Triss to sort of lock your opponent out of some of these key cards that they need. So using this Evan-faced Triss is also a really useful answer to these decks for Greyjoy, because I do think Greyjoy is also vulnerable, because Greyjoy has very few intrigue icons that are good besides their big dudes, and they need to be able to play those big dudes and keep them on the board and not be vulnerable to things like Prince's Plan. Like, Asha's great, Euron's amazing, but, you know, Doran plus the Prince's Plan plus Ricasso is often enough to go over the one big dude, right? Because Greyjoy doesn't necessarily have the time, because this is a little bit faster than a lot of Martell decks, it doesn't necessarily have the time to find 3 good characters with intrigue icons. So you can easily be caught off guard. Triss gives you outs that your deck would not. So Triss is definitely, I think, still an inclusion in Greyjoy. You know, you may have pulled back a little bit on Triss with combo out of the meta, but with this back end, if you need to be able to hit someone always tells, right? Because a lot of Greyjoy's strategies to get something like Recross on the board runs around offensive valors, and if that valor gets canceled, you are shit out of luck, my friends. Triss, though, if they cancel that, well, Triss can at least pull that someone always tells, which opens room for your hand's judgment to get through or not get your plot reset again. Your reset gets set again. Reset get canceled again. There we go. That's better English. Have your cancel oh my god, your reset cancel again. Why can I not say that? Anyway, Triss is just very useful against these kinds of strategies. So those are 5 cards that I think really give most factions, 3 of them are neutral, barring the gate, Nightmares, and Hand's Judgment, and then Ward and Triss are non-loyal answers in 2 factions that I think have real trouble. In general, of course, Targ is also going to be good against this deck. Your ability to snipe Picasso with either Danny or Crown of Gold. Super useful. Just burn in general, pumping those strengths down. It also has outs. But I think actually the most consistent deck that can beat it is to go back to the deck I recommended last time, which is John Barber's deck that won Kubla Khan, a Landing Crossing deck. So why a Landing Crossing deck? So Landing Crossing, this version of Landing Crossing has the ability to go toe-to-toe on the intrigue side of things with toe-to-toe on the intrigue side with Martell. You are running Casterly Rock. You have Cersei, who is 6 strength, is not kneeling if you do 2 intrigue challenges. So you can put the pressure on the Martell player's hand that they're not going to be able. You have First Snow, which is a very good reset if it doesn't get canceled. You have Heads on Spikes, which is super strong because, again, if you snipe a Ricasso, GG, well played. This deck is too fast for them to do anything. So we got Cersei, we got Tyrion, we got Tywin. There's intrigue strength here that can go toe-to-toe, right? And you're running the Tyrion's Chain combos to just empty their hand and gain power. You've got Hear Me Roar to surprise them. You've got Never Bet Against My Family. You're just putting so much pressure on the Martell player to draw perfectly and to execute their game plan perfectly. They don't have the time against your deck. Now, they can counter you. Like, you're going to have to fight. If you're the Lannister player, you have to fight through their strong intrigue presence. But an early Cersei and an early Casterly Rock is a lot of pressure, particularly if you can get the Heads on Spikes chain going, right? Forced March also helps, right? There's just like a lot of different ways in which this deck can be really too fast. And not just fast like getting power, but just like putting that instant pressure on the Martell player that they have to A, play perfectly, and B, draw perfectly. And it's hard to get your deck to do that consistently, right? So you have a lot of outs here. Of course, you're not running a bunch of the cards that I said that you should, Ward or Hand's Judgment or Nightmares in Barber's version here. But I think it gets around that by being able to go one toe-to-toe in the intrigue battle, and these Heads on Spikes are just super useful, right? And just you force that Martell player to have that someone always tells early, have to do this. Like this is a gotcha matchup where they have to have it. You're not going to give them enough time, and they're not going to be able to get some cheeky early Ricassos off when you have Cersei Lannister doing 2 intrigue challenges against them and still standing afterwards. Very, very strong. And again, the Casterly Rock, Bodyguard helps you survive their valors. Treachery is not as useful in this matchup as it is in other ones, but Tyrion's Chain is super good, right? Because you're putting additional pressure. You're requiring them, okay, so they didn't have the Someone Always Tells for the Heads on Spikes, or they did. You can Tyrion's Chain, and they've already used one of their only cancels, right? The chances that they have 2 of them are pretty low, right? So now, okay, you did get the Heads on Spikes effect. And the ability to eat away at Ricasso dupes is just really strong. If you if I was playing this a little bit today, Barber's deck, I might put like a cut at Sir Emerald Lorch or something and slide in oh my god, Sir Ilan Payne. I keep forgetting. A Sir Ilan Payne because he's super good against Ricasso on a first snow turn in particular. So eat the dupe, first snow, and he's back in hand, and a lot of their synergies are turned off, and you've got an ability. Now it's like a big tempo hit, but you can do things like hear me roar him into play, so you're not paying 6, right? Boom, boom, boom. You know, and he's a knight, so you can also put him into play later with Sir Osman Kettleback. Like, I think that there is room to find one for a single Sir Ilan Payne. I wouldn't go like 3x Sir Ilan Paynes, but that might be the one change I might make the Barber's list if you're really worried about Martell Wars to Come. Now, that's not a guarantee though, because again, this deck and again, Adam's version is excellent, but not refined. And I don't think the archetype is fully refined. We'll see if it's going to be fully refined by the end of regional season or the end of by Gen Con, or some of the big Road to Stolic events. But I do think that Barber's deck gives you some real outs, but there's no guarantee because this deck is really powerful and it's hard to play against. Like, it's not easy to play against this deck. It's got a lot of outs on its own, right? And it can be very, very frustrating to play against. And you definitely, particularly for people who don't have experience with it, they're like, what? Picasso? Oh, I see what you're doing. And, you know, when to defend the intrigue challenges, it just can be very frustrating if you don't have experience against it. So I hope this video has given you the necessary experience to be ready for this deck when you see it out there in the wild. But I don't think that this is far from the final word about it. I don't think this it's probably not the final word I'm going to be giving about this deck. I'll probably have additional strategies in the future, so I may end up doing a second video about this deck if it continues to be such a force in the meta, and particularly if we start seeing published, refined lists that come out. But I kind of had to fudge the issue here. I feel like Adam's version is the best that's sort of out in public. I'm sure some of the best Martell players in the world have their own lists. There's a version also that did very well at Euros. It was in the top 16 that was running out of Crossing. I don't think that that's optimized, it's much less optimized in the sense that, like, I just think Wars to Come is straight up better than a Crossing deck, but the Crossing deck can do some of the same things with Ricasso. And I've run into, like, on versions that are running Knights, some that have Doran, some that go all in on icon control, some that are... There's just a lot of ways to build around that shell. So hopefully the suggestions here, make sure you're running Nightmares, make sure you're running Hand's Judgment, make sure that you're running Barring the Gates, all these things that I suggest here. Wards, excellent. Triss, try to go fast, will help you in the future when you run into this again in a regional or at Gen Con, or, you know, just at a game night kit. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I think the next on my agenda, I think I said before, was Greyjoy. I was originally going to do Greyjoy, but I decided instead I think that this might be a little bit more timely than Greyjoy, which is kind of just a perennial threat. But I'm also considering doing some more general advice videos, like on how to build with a team, which is something, you know, with Gen Con coming, with Stolic on the horizon, and the big Road to Stolic events, that may be approaching the game as a team, building as a team, deck building as a team. And I have a lot of really fun and funny stories from building with some of the characters that I build with that I would love to share with people. If you're interested in that, let me know either in the comments here, or if you just want me to keep going on with videos. But I was also thinking about just doing sort of general learn to play stuff to sort of help for new players or players that are trying to become, you know, move from, say, a level 3 player to a level 2. I was also maybe considering doing a video about draft, which is one of my favorite formats, and about melee. So I don't know. There's like lots of things on the table, but I'm going to definitely keep doing these sort of meta deck videos, definitely, but just sort of additional videos. And plus I have some time off over the next couple of days. So I have time to make more videos. So anyway, let me know if you enjoyed this video, you thought it was thoughtful, down in the comments. If you have any suggestions for future content, please let me know. I'm super duper excited by these videos. I love doing them. So whatever you want to see from the future, hell, if you want me to stop, I can stop, I guess. I don't know. I enjoy it too much probably to stop. But I would definitely suggest that you make suggestions below, or on the Facebook thread about this video, things like that. So anyway, I hope this helped, and I'll see everybody soon.